Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on the renovation plan for St. Michael's. I want to start by saying that this has been in development now for about 2 years. It's been a long process, and we've discovered there are varying degrees of knowledge about what the plan is and what it entails and what the timing is. And we would like to bring everybody as up to date as possible on this so that we're all on the same page and so that you understand some of the thinking behind it and how we envision it unfolding. First of all, I would like to say that we've done this with the help of the Renovation Committee. This has been a really fantastic committee that has worked, I would say, with great thoughtfulness and very creatively. There's been a spiritual dimension to what the committee has been doing. And we've been very collegial and collaborative. It's been a great and very productive committee. And I just want to acknowledge the people who were on it and made it possible. I'm going to ask them to stand if they're here as I call them out. One is Michael Smith, Denisha Williams, Alan Kennedy, Walter Kane, who's behind here. It's John Cantrell, John Stickney, I see John Stickney there, and Gail Robinson, and I hope I've gotten everyone else. And of course, Mother Kate has been working closely with us, and I think that she has really made sure that everything we're doing is highly consistent with what we do here at St. Michael's as in terms of values. I'd also like to point out that we've been working, of course, with an architect. That's Richard McElhenney Architects. They're a small firm, and we selected them after a careful vetting process because we thought it would be a good fit with us just in terms of working culture. And also, Richard has a lot of experience working with historic buildings like ours, and we thought that was germane. And I can tell you that it's really been a very effective, collaborative process. We've enjoyed working with Richard and are very confident about what's going to happen as we move forward. Richard is here. And I'm going to bring him up shortly. He'll be giving you the real show, and it's been terrific working with them. Very importantly, we had a set of guiding values as we went into this process. We wanted to make sure that everything we're doing really aligns with our values as St. Michael's Church, and the guiding things in this first phase that we're going to be talking about was creating accessibility into our buildings. These are 19th century buildings with 19th century access systems, and they don't fit our century. We also wanted to make our buildings more welcoming to people, whether you're members of this congregation, guests, friends from the neighborhood, or people coming from for concerts or activities, whatever. We wanted our buildings to be more welcoming. So everything we're going to hear about today was grounded in these goals of accessibility and welcome into our buildings. And finally, we heard from Gwen last week about the report that the Reparations Committee had given to the vestry in October. I just want to say that the vestry was really moved by the report. We recognized in this an opportunity for us to both animate in the community that's our community here in St. Michael's and the community outside of St. Michael's in our neighborhood, the potential of people in our community as we examine the past and where we can take it in the present and the future. And it was a really moving presentation from the committee, and they will be coming back in January to present to the congregation. But we also recognize that it really is important that the Reparations Committee be represented on the Renovations Committee. So we're going to be bringing Gwen Seeley-Singer and Gregory Bryant, if they will stand, and there you are. Oh, excuse me. It's Gregory and Carol O'Connor Edwards. Will be joining us on the Renovation Committee so that we make sure that these two important committees are really aligned and as we're moving ahead. So thank you for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over now to Walter, who's going to give us a little background on how we worked, and then we will hear from Richard.
Thanks, John. I have to kind of stand on my tiptoes, I think, to get over the laptop here. So we are really excited about what the committee has come up with and what Richard has come up with. But we can't really talk about these buildings at St. Michael's without talking about the history of our church. So we have a very rich history. St. Michael's Parish is more than 200 years old, and we started as a country church in this neighborhood when this was still the country. And as New York City developed north, as you see in this slide, there was a series of buildings. We're now in our third building on this site, and this edifice was put here to serve the growing community. And it's amazing to think that this building has been here for more than 130 years, and we're still using it very much like it was originally intended. So our forebears had great foresight in the planning of this complex that we still enjoy. Pretty soon after this sanctuary building was built in 1890, the parish house was added next door. So that's about 15 years after this. So the way I've always thought about these buildings that were sort of built in two phases is that this sanctuary, this beautiful building we're in, is, well, our whole complex is really a fulfillment of the great commandment, to love God with all our hearts, and then to love our neighbors as ourselves. And I've always thought about this part of the complex, the worship part, where we gather and pray and enjoy music and celebrate together, as the sort of loving God half of that commandment. And I've always thought of the parish house as the loving our neighbors part, our community engagement part. And that building was built very much with that intention by our forebears. And it's interesting that that's still how it's used. So we do use the parish house as a parish heavily on Sundays and Wednesdays, but the rest of the week it's primarily used to serve our community. We house a couple of schools. There are all kinds of groups that meet there, nonprofits that have office space there, and it's heavily, heavily used. It's really fulfilling this commandment, the way we use these buildings. And if you look at where we've invested in our buildings in more recent history, we had a big capital campaign about 20 years ago to restore the sanctuary, the Tiffany windows in particular. And as we looked as a committee at our whole building complex, it became really clear that the real needs going forward are more in the parish house than in this complex. So it's sort of, we're in this act of balancing the two sides of the Great Commandment, and going forward, we're going to be more focused in terms of investing in our complex in the parish house. So we've been working for 2.5 years as a committee. It's been a real privilege to be part of it. And what we're trying to do is, as John mentioned, is to bring our buildings forward, to sort of continue the vision that our forebears had, and to make sure that our complex meets the needs of New York as it changes in our immediate neighbors. So we've got a guide we've come up with sort of a guidelines for renovating the building complex over the next 5 to 7 years. You can't do everything all sort of in one phase, so we've tried to group the various things we need to do together, and we've got some flexibility in how we might move going forward. And it's also done kind of in units, so we can sort of do it as we have time and money to execute the plan. So this is the list of what we've determined we really need to do. So as John mentioned, the biggest need, the most pressing need is accessibility. It's very difficult if you're an older member of the parish or mobility challenged. You know it's hard to get in and out of this building, and it's also a little confusing to navigate the building in terms of signage and corridors and things. So we're planning to straighten all that out. Bathrooms. I know it's kind of funny to talk about bathrooms in the sanctuary, but they're kind of embarrassing, and we'd like to address that while we're at it. We are very privileged to have most of our original windows in the complex, but they're challenged, they're crumbling. We need to fix those for the future. And then there's also a bunch of infrastructure, plumbing, electric, storm drainage, heating that we need to upgrade. We also have some areas that are really underutilized, that have a lot of potential, and particularly the second floor performance hall is underutilized, and we'd like to activate that space and get more use out of it. And finally, there are a bunch of areas that just need upgrading, like the kitchen and some of the office spaces and meeting rooms. So what we did as a group in planning this is we sort of separated all these needs. It's very complicated. There's a long list of things, but we tried to simplify it and group things so that we could execute this very logically. So we came up with 3 phases. So the first phase is what Richard is about to tell us about, and it's about accessibility, it's about the critical infrastructure that we need to execute the rest of the plan, and then a few discrete things like bathrooms. Then we have 2 later phases planned, which focus on things like the performance hall and the kitchen, and trying to bring the whole complex up to speed. And what we've done is tried to group these together so it minimally disturbs our use of the buildings while they're being renovated. We're trying to prioritize the most pressing needs and do those first. We're also thinking about, we're trying to look forward, just like our forebears did, and we're thinking about things like climate change as we think about electricity usage and being efficient and good stewards of energy, but also things like storm drainage, which are increasingly challenges as we see more severe rainfall. And then finally, we're juggling to try to make sure we can still use our buildings during the renovation. So with all of that, I'm going to turn it over to Richard McElhinney, who we chose as our architect. We've been working together for 2 years, and without further ado, I'll turn it over to Richard.
Thank you, Walter. So as you said, I'm Richard McElhinney, and I'm the architect who's been working with the committee for 2 years. And as John said, it's been a collaborative and thoughtful process, vetting many options for interventions that have been prioritized in this first phase. So I'll walk through the physical improvements that are part of that phase and leave time, I hope, for any questions you have at the end. So this is a plan of the complex. The sort of purple color is the sanctuary. The bluer purple is the parish house. The green is the garden, of course, and yellow is circulation. On the right side, the east side, is Amsterdam, and on the south is 99th Street in this drawing. So this shows the conditions of accessibility today. Let's see if I can find, can you see that? That cursor's a little small, but anyway, let me see. All right. So at the 99th Street side, as you know, there's a step up from the street, so already there's a sort of obstacle to entering the site. There. Okay, great, thank you. As you approach as the parish house itself, there are very steep steps there, which are impediment, not just to people who are in wheelchair, but anyone who's mobility challenged. That's a steep flight of steps, and it's a sort of daunting access to the parish house. And then off to the left, there are also steps down into the playground and the rear, which sort of limit access there. And then number 2 on this plan is the access to the lower level, to the school in the lower level, as well as to your own service areas in the lower level. That's another steep flight of stairs going down there. Number 3 on the plan indicates just what Walter was referring to, sort of complex of passages and corridors and sort of non-intuitive ways of getting around and through the building. Number 4 is the sort of mid-block entrance on Amsterdam, where there is a very steep ramp, and then there's a ramp that can be added, but it's not a ramp that accessibility that really provides true accessibility. It still requires assistance to get up that steep ramp. And then 5 indicates the bridge from the parish house to the choir loft above. That, as you know, you go down steps, up some steps, and then down some more steps to get through that. So nor is that an accessible route. So our effort is to resolve all those access issues. We're starting at the street and eliminating the step from 99th Street into the site. And then at the entrance to the parish house, those stairs will be reconstructed so that they are ADA compliant. ADA, as you probably know, is the American with Disabilities Act. So it'll be a much lower slope, a very lower ratio of the rise to the run. There'll be a ramp down to the playground in the rear and the whole rear part of the complex. And then at number 2, there'll be a ramp from the street down to a landing, and then from there a ramp down, an ADA accessible ramp down to the lower level, to the school. And also to you can see in the middle, the sort of orange square is a new elevator that serves all levels of the parish house and of the sanctuary. And that lower level will also give access to that. So you'll have complete accessibility to all levels of the complex through that space. Number 4, over on Amsterdam, the plan calls for opening a door from that mid-block vestibule, and then the creation of a ramp in that porch or loggia that would bring you back to the vestibule of the church and into the narthex. So there would be a completely accessible route for people entering the sanctuary. Number 5 indicates a rework of the bridge above from the choir room to the choir loft that would also be accessible. And then number 6, as was mentioned earlier, are 7 new bathrooms, 4 of which are handicapped accessible. And then number 7, again, just indicates a less circuitous route from the sanctuary to the parish house. You'll be able to enter right through that space, straight into the parish house. This also shows, and I'll get into this in more detail, filling in the floor of a light well, an exterior light well, adjacent to that number 7, which will allow a passage directly from the narthex also into the parish house which without having to go through that stair. This is a blow-up of the garden, and as I mentioned, we'll eliminate the steps at the street line, and then you can begin to see the ramps that will provide access to the parish house entry, the ramp down to the playground in the back, the ramp down to the lower level to the school entrance and the entrance to the elevator, and also, of course, where you have a path now up against the building, there'll be a ramp connecting those two systems. So all of it will be ADA accessible, will meet the American Disability guidelines. As we work on these entries, as we eliminate those yellow steps there, it will require some work on these gates. So we are developing with the committee the design of gates. As you see, this sort of preliminary design shows an arched shape that reflects the arches in the entrance to the parish house and at the east entry as well. So some of the components are that arch shape seems consistent with the design of the rest of the complex, and it also is a sort of more welcoming, embracing shape. We would also like to include light in that arch shape, so that it provides a sort of pool of light on the entry. So again, it's another welcoming gesture, as well as obviously the practical aspects of that. This is the current east entry, and then on the right is a rendering of the proposed approach. As you can see, sort of first and foremost, there's a ramp leading down to that lower entry area. The canopy, which in the existing condition is an opaque canopy, creating sort of a dark, between that canopy and those steep steps down to that entry level. It's sort of dark and a little bit forbidding. The approach on the right that will be part of phase one is that more gentle slope down to that level, a glass canopy so light will penetrate into that area. So it will be much more evident, visible, accessible, and welcoming. There are other features. As the ramp ramps down, the corner of the garden, we didn't want the corner of the garden to sort of grow too high as the ramp ramps down. So you can see on the right-hand image that the garden will step down as the ramp descends. On the right is the trash shed, which is right now sort of right up against the street, and it's not too sort of welcoming presence as you sort of come through that gate. We're proposing to sort of push that a little bit further back in the site, and there might be a trellis or something like that would help conceal that. This is a blow-up of the ramp on the Amsterdam side. Again, right now you come on the left, you can see that you come up a few steps, and then there's that very steep ramp, and then there's the temporary ramp that can be deployed for further access. But it is a very steep condition and does require assistance. So on the right, the intention is to lower that door, create a new door into the loggia, into that porch, and create again an ADA compliant ramp to the vestibule of the sanctuary and into the narthex. So you would join all the other participants there. And then there's the existing condition on the upper left here, which you're familiar with. And then on the right, the proposed, there's no real difference in those views. The only difference is that this door in the mid-block will be lowered, the stairs will be removed, and that door will be lowered, so you'll have street-level access to the lower starting point of that ramp. And the only real visible sort of consequence will be this header over that door will get a little deeper than it is here in the existing condition. This slide goes to the wayfinding, to the sort of ability to find one's way around the space in an intuitive way, so that, again, people, particularly visitors, feel welcome They feel comfortable finding their way through the complex, and that seemed a particularly important goal also, that the community would be welcomed and that they would find it a comforting and welcome space to come to. So many of these on the left, many of the sort of red hatched areas I've spoken about before, there are that are not accessible. We've also highlighted some areas which are sort of tight and again, sort of non-intuitive places in the system where the system's sort of tightened down and you sort of begin to lose your bearings. On the right-hand side, I talked about the sort of accessibility improvements that have been made. And then again, I alluded about putting a piece of floor in here in a space we're calling the atrium space that really joins the sanctuary and the parish house in the way that Walter was talking about, where those two parts of your life and your mission come together. And then this also shows the bathrooms and the elevator sort of centered between the sanctuary and the parish house where they're readily accessible from both. And this is a blow-up of the lower level. As I mentioned, there will be a ramp, no steps involved, coming from 99th Street on the east side, and then to the elevator on the lower level. So this elevator, as I mentioned, serves all levels of the parish house, and then via the bridge from the choir room, also the choir loft in the sanctuary. As an added bonus of this, and as an added bonus of filling in that little piece of floor above, this route also accesses the Saturday kitchen storage, so that deliveries now, basically actually all deliveries for the church, and particularly for the Saturday kitchen, can come down a ramp, which will be a much more efficient a way to do things. It'll ease taking trash and garbage out of the building, and it'll ease deliveries for all your purposes. And then on the second floor, the elevator will continue up, of course. So it will, as I mentioned, through the choir room, give access to the choir loft above. Also, as Walter mentioned, the performance hall will greatly benefit from having an accessible route to it. Not just for your own purposes, but for community use. This should greatly enhance the appeal. Right. It does not. This is a very complicated situation here, and that has been studied. It hasn't been incorporated into this plan. There are ways of doing that, but it's not incorporated in the first phase at this time. So again, the elevator would provide access to the recital hall now, and should in the future it be renovated, that would be an additional incentive for the community and yourselves to use it, to put it to greater use. This is the space that I referred to earlier as the atrium. It may not be a space that you see or are terribly aware of, but on the left, the parish house is on the left, and the sanctuary is on the right. The two windows you see in front of you are that little piece of corridor that connects the angel room to the sanctuary, and that if you go through the stair, you can get to the parish house from that space. And then up and beyond that little piece of corridor is the connection, the bridge from the parish house to the back choir loft. I'll make that distinction. And it is, again, it's sort of very up and down. I think it was an old fire escape that's been enclosed, and enclosed with plywood. Anyway, that will also become an accessible route. So on the right, you see the proposed atrium space. The number 1 indicates that we're filling in that little piece of floor toward us from the windows in the left. Number 2 is the new bridge that connects the choir room to the choir loft, to the back choir loft. Number 3 is a door that goes directly from the sanctuary right there. and through this space and axially connects to the parish house. And number 4 is a new set of doors that are windows now, but would become doors that access the nursery, so that those are directly accessible through this space from the sanctuary. This sort of blows up the bathroom layout. So again, as I mentioned, they're pretty much centered in the space between the sanctuary and serving both that sanctuary and the parish house. The orange rectangle is the elevator. There are 7 bathrooms. They're individual bathrooms for single fixtures. It seemed to us that that is more accommodating in many ways, more private. The handicapped will have baby changing tables, so they hopefully will, again, be more private and serve more purposes in this configuration. And then to go to the sort of critical infrastructure issues that really seemed the most important to address early on in the series of work. One is the windows, and here you see the condition of some of the double-hung windows in the parish house. These windows are 120 years old, and it's a tribute to Galina and Raj that they have been able to maintain them in a functioning fashion this long, but there's only so much you can do over more than a century of weathering. So some are showing the toll. But that care that has been given them has really kept them in a condition that they can be restored, and they need to be replaced. So again, this is another place where the sort of character of the complex can be saved, salvaged, restored, and that's the intention here. There'll be 97 windows, almost 100 windows will be addressed as part of phase 1. 85 will be restored. 12 are really sort of too far gone, and they will need to be replaced. But it will include not only a repair, partial replacement of members for the sill and particularly the lower part of the sash. But there will also be interior storm windows added to those. So if there's any draftiness, that increases obviously the energy efficiency, both in terms of infiltration as well as heat retention. So that will be a huge benefit going forward. And then, again, as Walter mentioned, drainage piping, also more than a century old in most cases. There have been replacements, obviously, as issues have come up. You may have heard stories of the floods in the basement. You can see evidence of some leakage over there by the columbarium. This system does need to be replaced. Again, as was mentioned, we're seeing greater rainfall. It's going to continue to be predicted to increase, and so pipe sizes will be increased, and the whole storm drainage system all the way out to the street will be replaced as part of phase 1. On the right, you see the existing electric room. We will need to upgrade the electric service to run the elevator and also to run mechanical ventilation and air conditioning systems that will be needed for spaces like the atrium and the spaces adjacent to the atrium. So that will be upgraded. You now have 400 amps. It'll be upgraded to 1,200 amps. And the sort of infrastructure of this room, which is below grade and which does leak and is not fire protected and things like that, will all be brought up to code and to good practice. So this is, as Walter mentioned, we studied many, many ways of improving the complex for the long term to better serve your mission. And these are the items which became part of phase 1. These are the ones that seemed the highest priority. And I think we've discussed most of them: the atrium, the bridge, basement circulation. We will improve the railing there, which is not completely compliant right now. And we're trying to keep John from tumbling off Don Cantrell. There is some hazmat, is some asbestos which will need to be remediated, and there is in the northwest corner of the parish house, there is some leakage through the exterior masonry, which we will be repairing as well. So this is an overview of the whole complex, of course, and you can see the pieces that we will be touching: the garden, the gates, the steps, the ramps, the lower level entrance, the atrium space, and this is the elevator overrun, which is sort of tucked behind the roof here, and then there will be some mechanical ventilation to serve, as I said, the atrium and adjacent spaces. But the intent is that so these improvements will, as I say, the intent is to make it accessible, to make it welcoming, to make it durable for the long term, so that you can serve your mission sort of unimpeded. But the character and the ethos and the sense of the place will not be impaired. It will feel the same. It will be the same. It'll be better in ways, but I think to the casual visitor, you really won't be readily apparent how those changes have been introduced. Let me say a couple words about schedule. So we are now working on the construction documents, which is the phase that will define the work for the bidding and by multiple contractors, and then the work by the selected contractor. We think the work will take about a year, with some sort of cleanup at the end, as always. And as was mentioned earlier, these lower 4 lines speak to the beginnings of the effort to make sure that you can continue to use the space effectively during the course of the construction. So there will be certain amounts of phasing and doing things in a specific order that will direct the contractor to do. And it's important for you all, of course, but also for your tenants. So we need to keep all of that in mind as the work goes forward. The ultimate strategy for that will be done in concert with the contractor, but we will give them the parameters which they will work to. So, John, do you want to just talk about where we stand now? Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Richard. That was a brief overview of a lot of work. After a lot of work, you do need to be able to summarize and condense, and that's really the essence. And as we said in the beginning, it's about creating access and a welcoming aspect to our buildings, and addressing some of those critical infrastructure things. So as Walter mentioned, this is phase 1. We did the full campus plan that was completed in fourth quarter of last year, and that looked at broader issues of not just what we saw from Richard now, but later phases, like what we might do up in the hall, what we might do with the kitchen. These are all important, and you need to create a complete plan. You're never going to do everything in the plan, but you need to think about all the important things. And that is what the committee tried to do. The vestry approved the construction financing for phase 1, the part we just heard about now, in June of this year. And phase 1 construction, as we just heard, is going to start probably this coming spring. That's the schedule as of now. What about those later phases? We'll know when we're done with phase 1. We will stand back, see how things have progressed, what our finances allow us to consider at that point, and make an assessment then about what seems to be right moving ahead. You only go as far as you can responsibly go at any one time. So we're going to continue to monitor how COVID's impacting everything that we're doing. We did delay our process for at least 6 months because we were concerned about the impact of COVID and what it might mean to us as a community and in terms of our financial wherewithal. Our assessment is that our financial health is good, and we're not talking about finances today. That is next week, next weekend, same time, same place. We will talk about costs and how we plan to pay for it and how we think we're going to come out the other end. So please come back for that. And now I'd like to just get questions from people. You can put questions into the chat or call them out here, and the right person will try to answer them. Oh. Yeah, yes, Ariane. Right. So the question is, well, we have 2 lofts where singers sing from. There's the loft in the back with the organ, and then there's the west loft here, which is used a lot now. And the question was, are we creating accessible access to that loft? The answer is that's not in the plan right now. We did look at it. It's a little complex, as Richard mentioned. It's also expensive, but it could be considered. I mean, there are ways to do it. It's kind of a tricky access. Richard, do you want to say something about the access? Yeah, he doesn't have much to add other than that it's tricky and expensive. So that is something that would be in a later phase, not this phase. Yes, Mary. Yes, that will be the idea is, can people come in at the lower level and get up the stairs? Yeah, the idea is that you'll be able to come in on an accessible ramp. It'll be at the basement level, and we will have a new door there so that people can come in. Though we plan to have a security system so that it's safe, and you can get directly to the elevator, and that will take you up to any floor. And once you're up on the 2nd floor, you'll be able to get to the bridge, the new bridge that will take you up to the organ loft. Yeah, Mary? Right.
I mean, they would just go to the elevator, I'm assuming.
Right. Mary's asking about whether the steps at the parish house entrance are going to be removed. No, the exterior steps are going to become easier to negotiate. The ones that you encounter once you get into the building are still going to be there. So we looked at a lot of different solutions for how to get into the building. You know, how can we finally conquer this problem? And it wasn't easy. And so after looking at all of the solutions, the one we settled on is the simplest, the least intrusive. You know, we didn't want to have some kind of gigantic ramp that was running around the garden, and the one that would be simplest and most affordable was to create that new ramp in the garden that will go right down to the basement level. So Right, and you would access the elevator from there. Now, also, another concern we had was that when you, we're essentially creating a new primary entrance into the building. So we wanted it to be attractive and, again, welcoming. No, we don't want anyone to think that they're going through a second-class entrance. So that's why the plan is to put new doors down there to make it look like it's intended as an entrance, and to have the new canopy that will be glass and will allow light to pass through, so that the whole thing looks welcoming. And yeah, once they're into the basement, there'll be you know, a flat floor that can take you throughout the basement and to the elevator. No steps. Yes, Betty. Between yeah, are you talking about the nursery? Yes, okay, that room with the doors, when you are going down the atrium hallway there, the new hallway, which doesn't exist now, and there was that room with the nice French doors. Yes, that's the nursery. So right now there are windows there. We're going to put the doors there because the doors that are now on the other side of that room are going to become bathrooms. So all the restrooms are going to line that area. So the nursery will get a little bit smaller, but we've looked at this and judged that the space is still going to be adequate for what we do. And we also rent that space to, say, the Russian school, and so that will still be, I assume, you know, part of the rentable space that we have. And I should mention that we've been really sensitive to the issue of our tenants. Our tenants are very important to us. I mean, they pay significant rents without which we cannot operate. So we do not want to harm the interests of our tenants, and we will be working with them to mitigate the impact of construction on their operations. For instance, you saw that we're planning to, you know, begin the construction in late spring into the summer, and the reason is that that's when the schools will have time to, they'll have some time off. There's an opening in the schedules. So obviously you don't want to be hammering through bedrock to create a shaft for the elevator when you've got a school operating next door. So we're not going to do that. We're going to work with them to have the, you know, mitigate any impact on their operations. Yeah.
So I'm tasked with monitoring the chat. So we do have a couple of questions from our virtual brethren. So there are a couple of questions, very specific questions about, one is a question about whether we are planning for illumination over the new ramped entrance here on Amsterdam, and that's not actually in the drawings, but I believe, Richard, if you want to.
So we are certainly planning for new illumination. It doesn't have a gate per se, the way it does on 99th Street, but there is illumination in that loggia. So as you're going up and down, that will be illuminated, and then, you know, depending on your choice, it really can be a feature of the church that space sort of glows in the early evening or morning as people are coming and going. So it could be an important sort of identifier of the church as well.
Thank you. And then there was another very specific question about drainage down on, I think, at the bottom of the ADA ramp on the 99th Street side, because obviously that's a kind of a low area. So do you want to address that?
So the drainage, at the bottom of each of those ramps, there's what's called a trench drain, which is a linear drain, so that any water coming down those ramps is captured right at the bottom of the ramp. It doesn't flow onto the adjacent landing, and then it's captured in the storm system, which ultimately goes out to the street. So there will be, as I say, 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 trench drains in that system. So they have very narrow openings. You know, it's not a question. There's no impediment to pedestrians, but any water flow off those ramps is captured at the bottom of each of those ramps.
Okay, and we have another. I think it's more of a comment than a question, but sort of raising the issue of reparations and how that our journey as a parish, thinking through reparations, which has been a process that I think is ongoing, and in that we are bringing two, as John mentioned earlier, bringing two new members to the restoration committee from the reparations committee to make sure that as we go forward that we're creating opportunities as a parish as part of our mission to address those issues and repair them. And I would also say that we're really trying to make sure that with this accessibility and welcoming initiative that's really the core of phase one, that we make sure that we're open for all members of the community to easily get in and join us and to feel welcomed. So that's an ongoing conversation. We're very much trying to do everything we can to have these two efforts kind of merge going forward. I don't know if anybody else has more questions or comments? Yeah.
Until about 2 months ago, I had a job for many years at financial district in application, very time in my life past Trinity Church, and going through renovations, I think, that were originally announced to be about a year and a half or something, and they're still going on. This is the third year, so I don't know if they discovered that they should add to what they plan to do, or whether they not been able to hold contractors' fees to the fire. I don't know, so I'm not privy to, what's going on there, but I just know that every time I walk by there, a place I used to go, certainly at lunch hour, many times for concerts and things, they're not kind of doing that. They seem to be very locked up and keeping people out. I don't know what Sundays don't go down there, that they account for Sundays for their membership.
So the question from the floor really is about the length of time of renovations and I think accessibility, the ease of entering the complex during our renovation process. Is that a good summary? Right, and there's a concern because of observing what's happened. It seems to be a very long process at Trinity Church that maybe makes it a little harder to get in. And yeah, so it's a general question about what do we do during the renovation and how long is it going to go? Do you want to, Richard? Well, I mean, the phase one is if I've got this down correctly, is scheduled to start this spring, so spring of 2022, and go through the summer of 2023. So we're looking at about 15 15 months sort of construction. And as I look at the long-term plans, I think phase one is going to be perhaps the most noticeable because we're doing all the access into the building and right up front in that phase. And so, you know, the garden's going to be disrupted a little bit during that and our entries in. So we're really, that's Richard, maybe you want to address it. As for future phases, the good thing about the way we're trying to do this is in bite sizes. So we can, after phase one is done, we can make a decision as a parish whether we want to immediately dive into the next phase or whether we need to take a breather, and that'll be a factor of convenience, cost, you know, all of these things. So what we're trying to do is to do this phase one, get this over with, and then we'll step back and see where we are and figure out sort of the timing from there. Richard, do you want to?
So as I mentioned, we are working on the first. There are many parts to your question and many parts to the answer. One is just, you know, what's happening at Trinity. I don't know their specific building program, of course, but any older building, you will discover things you didn't necessarily expect. Years and years have gone by. So we do a lot of work with historic buildings. We will select a contractor that has that kind of experience. So we hope to minimize and we've done a lot of investigations here, both visual as well as sort of probes and things like that to try to discover, you know, concealed conditions. So we hope to be as much to understand the existing conditions as possible. As Walter said, also, we're taking it in sort of bite-sized chunks. So they're relatively small chunks. I mean, working in the loggia is not going to disturb the access. We have a scheme for doing the east half of the garden, and then the west half. So you'll always have access. So even if the schedule does extend a little bit, the way the phasing is organized, you should have free access to things. And the last thing I'll mention is it's been an extremely challenging. The pandemic, I can well imagine, would have affected Trinity's progress. It's been an extremely challenging environment for construction, both the lead time of materials, shortages of labor. So I imagine they're confronting those things, which may have affected their schedule as well. Yes, Danisha. Sure.
Well, thank you all for coming. Everyone here, everyone still online. You can approach us with questions in the future. We want to keep everyone informed. We are going to, we did record this. We're going to archive it so that anyone who missed it can see it. And please help share the information that you've heard here today with others. We want the whole congregation to know what's planned, what the timing is, why we're doing it, and next week we'll talk about the finances. So thank you very much.